Now it's time for Perspective on the programme. And here in France, we reported on how earlier this week, the founder and CEO of the social media platform Telegram, Pavel Durov, said he will now hand over information to the authorities of people who use his platform for criminal ends. You remember Durov was charged by the authorities here in France last month with failing to curb extremist and terrorist content in France. That comes amid growing scrutiny of activities online, notably social media platforms. In the US, of course, they're accused of not doing enough to control content around the presidential elections there. And it was a similar story in the summer in the UK amid the far-right rioting and looting after false information spread that the killer of 3 children was a Muslim and an asylum seeker. Well, let's talk now to Head of Big Tech Accountability at Amnesty International, Pat de Bruyn. He joins us now. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. In the summer, amid those riots in the UK, Amnesty came out and said that the big tech platforms, they played an active role in fueling the racist violence there. What was your evidence for saying that then?
Hi, Stuart, and thanks for having me. We've been studying big tech platforms for a number of years and researching exactly how their business models and operations interact with situations of crisis and conflict, much like the racist violence that erupted earlier this summer in the UK. And we've been able to draw quite significant conclusions as to the shared attributes and features of these platforms, which actively amplify harmful content and which can stoke division, extremism, and even lead to offline violence. And this was just the latest iteration of such an instance. And this is a global problem. We've seen it erupt in respect of the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in Myanmar in 2017. We saw it again in the Ethiopian civil war in 2021. And of course, many other instances in between. And as you say, very recently in the United Kingdom. And that's because these platforms share common design features and business models that ultimately incentivize the type of harmful content that we have seen proliferate across these contexts and across these crises as well.
Yeah, Shiva, you're talking there about the algorithms, of course, that everyone has in these devices. If you read something on one subject, you get bombarded, don't you, with similar content. I mean, how on earth do you get around that problem, though? Is it a case of just having to switch them off?
I think the solutions to these problems are complex, they're nuanced, and they're multifaceted. There's no single silver bullet because these issues run deep. I think, first of all, it's important to say, obviously, the root cause of a lot of these issues, for example, in respect of the UK racist violence, run deep. And the UK's racism problem goes far back beyond the origins of social media. But what we have observed is that the introduction of these platforms, based on the design choices that have been baked into them, are really exacerbating these problems and providing the far right, for example, a powerful venue to incite hatred, to organize, and to recruit. And there are solutions, and we've been calling on governments and platforms to take certain measures that could seriously mitigate or even prevent a lot of these harms. And I think I would focus on 2 different areas when we're thinking through how to address these problems. Firstly, there are many measures that these companies could take. In fact, in recent years, companies like Meta and X have actually taken action to lay off and fire workers who are responsible for ensuring trust and safety, for ensuring that harmful content does not proliferate, and to respond to crisis situations. So rather than beefing up their capability to respond to these scenarios, these companies have actually been doing the opposite. They've been going in the wrong direction. So when situations like this erupt, they're under-resourced and cannot respond effectively.
The difficulty is, though, I mean, a lot of the people who are listening to this will be agreeing 100% with what you're saying. There'll be another half of the people who'll be going, but what you're talking about here is stopping free speech, and that's not right either.
I think this is a really important point because we know that according to international human rights standards, free speech is a delicate matter. It must be balanced against other rights. And the protection of minorities from racism, from discrimination, from incitement to violence must be balanced against free speech. And, infamously, I think Elon Musk has repeatedly stated since his takeover of X, for example, that he wants to promote absolute free speech. And we've seen kind of policy choices and corporate decisions following suit. But international human rights law is very clear that absolute free speech is not compliant with the responsibilities that accord to social media companies. They must strike a balance between the protection of minorities, preventing incitement to violence, and allowing for free speech. And that balance is clearly lacking in certain instances and in respect of certain platforms. And I would really stress that although there are always challenging decisions around whether a piece of content should remain online, for example, and free speech must be protected within limits, it's actually, there are deeper problems here that we need to address. And that is the business model of these companies that actually is leading to the amplification and spread of harmful content like wildfire, which is really actively inflaming these problems. So it's not just the fact that an individual is allowed to post, it's the fact that the algorithms are designed to promote a certain kind of content, which can then inflame social situations, drive extremism, enable disinformation to spread, and often...
Is it really possible to do, though? I mean, there are millions and millions of messages, of posts, day in, day out, aren't there? How on earth could anyone control that? I mean, it would need entire warehouses of people, wouldn't it, to sift through all this information? Who decides what's right and what isn't?
I think that that's a key point. Content moderation and effective content moderation is part of the solution, but it is not it is not enough to solve these problems. We need to look at the design choices and the business models of these companies, which are deliberately causing certain kinds of content, often the most harmful kinds of content, to be prioritized and spread as much as possible. This is because the companies are designed to keep our eyeballs on screens, to keep us on the platforms as long as possible, so that they can serve us more targeted advertising and so that they can collect more intimate personal data about us, which they can then monetize. This means they've designed their algorithms to prioritize engagement at all costs and above all else. So this profit logic is what is resulting in very harmful and dangerous content being prioritized. And this need not be the case. These are deliberate design choices which prioritize profit over human rights. And they're a symptom ultimately of regulatory failures, because these companies have been free to develop in this way with a reckless business model that shows little regard for human rights. And again, we see the outcomes and the evidence of that. And it's just getting more severe. So not only must these companies step up, governments need to step up as well to ensure that this reckless behavior is stopped.
And we're virtually out of time. Let me ask you very quickly a last question. Presumably it's very difficult internationally as well, because it's all very well if you in the UK decide one thing, if France decides something else, because most of these platforms are international, aren't they?
Exactly. It is a challenge. And, I want to point out the fact that the harms are global as well. And we've often seen that the worst harms, in fact, have been experienced by communities in the global south and the global majority, including in Myanmar, Ethiopia, and elsewhere. And while it's bad in English-speaking countries, in Europe, for example, as we've seen in the UK, it's much worse in other parts of the world where these companies have neglected their responsibilities even worse. And there are special responsibilities for the countries and states which host the global headquarters of these companies, such as the United States, for example, also Ireland, and therefore the European Union, where they have a special responsibility to ensure compliance and respect for human rights, which does have global implications as well. And we need to see much stronger enforcement of existing laws around data protection, around competition law, and around the newly introduced measures such as the Digital Services Act.
Good to talk to you on the programme today. Thanks very much, Pat de Bruyn, Head of Big Tech Accountability at Amnesty International. Thanks very much.